Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. What's going on today? What are we going to be talking about? Hey, is today the day we're going to do that big story?
Today is the day.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, as our show is named, we focus on true crime here in Michigan. But today, we are doing something a little different. I was contacted a few weeks ago from a man whose father was murdered, a man who has for the last 12 years relentlessly searched, interviewed, been on podcasts, and studied DNA markers in his endless pursuit of finding justice for his father. Now, sadly, as of this week, 12 years later, his father's case remains cold. So today, we will be doing what we can to help get his father's story out there in hopes that we can inspire someone to come forward. We just need one person to help bring justice that is long overdue. Also, after the story, we will be interviewing Mike Gatto, the son. So please, all of our listeners across the country and throughout the world, listen closely. Now, before we begin, this episode contains discussion of real crimes, violence, and sensitive subject matter. Some details may be difficult to hear, and listener discretion is advised. We rely on public records, reporting, and research available at the time of production. And as with any ongoing story, information may continue to evolve. Now, let's begin. This is Season 9, Episode 18, The Artist and the Crime Scene, The Murder of Joseph Gatto. In November of 2013, Los Angeles art teacher Joseph Gatto, a father, artist, mentor, and founder of the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, was found murdered in his Silver Lake home. Joseph spent his life teaching others to see the beauty in the world. But on this one night in 2013, that world turned dark. 12 years later, the case remains unsolved. In this haunting episode, Malice in the Mitten follows his son, Assemblyman Mike Gatto, through grief, obsession, and the unanswered questions that turn tragedy into a lifelong investigation. Mike Gatto is still searching for the truth. He was born Joseph Anthony Gatto on December 22nd, 1934, in Pueblo, Colorado, the son of Italian-American parents who had come west chasing work and a better life. His father was a coal miner, then shoveled coal for the steel industry. His mother sewed garments by hand. Now, hard work wasn't a virtue in their household. It was survival. When the Second World War broke out, the family packed up and headed west again. California promised jobs, sunshine, a different kind of future. They landed in East Hollywood, where Joe grew up among factory smoke, streetcar wires, and the color of post-war Los Angeles. Joe attended Fairfax High School, lettered in 4 sports, and when he wasn't practicing or studying, he was bagging groceries to help the family make rent. Even then, art was the thing that set him apart. He'd spend his bus money on sketch pads, walking home so he could afford pencils. After high school, he served in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State. The discipline he learned there stuck with him: structure, routine, self-reliance. When he came home, he poured all of that into teaching. He earned his bachelor's at Cal State Los Angeles, his master's at Pepperdine, and never stopped learning. He taught art and design like they were sacred languages. By the 1980s, Joe Gatto had founded the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, a place that would nurture generations of painters, photographers, and dreamers. He wasn't just their teacher. He was their compass. Students remember him as strict, demanding, but fair. The kind of mentor who would glance at your work and say, "Are you trying to please your mom with this drawing? Or are you trying to draw what you actually see?" That was Joe Gatto's way. Honest, disciplined, relentless in the pursuit of beauty and truth. The son of an immigrant coal shoveler who built an empire out of color, curiosity, and care. A man whose life was defined by creation until the night it was taken by destruction. He retired quietly, still painting, still teaching small workshops, sketching and creating his very own unique style of jewelry out of his Silver Lake home, a cozy 3-story house shaded by citrus trees. It was a place that felt lived in, the way only an artist's space can. You could tell what kind of man Joseph Gatto was just by looking at his 3rd-floor office. Sunlight catching glass jars of brushes, a drafting table scarred with years of charcoal marks, a half-finished watercolor sitting beside his morning coffee. Those who knew him said he had slowed down a little bit, but never stopped creating. Even in his 70s, Joe kept to a rhythm. Early mornings, soft music, a bit of drawing before breakfast, a short walk around the neighborhood, phone calls to his children. He wasn't a recluse, but he treasured quiet, the quiet that lets the mind breathe. In that quiet, though, the city never really slept. Silver Lake, for all its mid-century charm and bougainvillea-lined streets, still carried the heartbeat of Los Angeles. Unpredictable, loud, alive, and sometimes dangerous. November 12th, 2013 was one of those unremarkable Tuesday nights that no one remembers until it becomes unforgettable. The air had that fall coolness that creeps in after the sun sets over Sunset Boulevard. Neighbors remember the sound of distant traffic, dogs barking, the faint hum of televisions through thin walls. Nothing unusual. Inside his home, Joseph Gatto was alone. He and his wife had separated some years earlier. His grown children had lives of their own. That night, he was probably doing what he always did, working on a sketch, designing jewelry, rewriting his will, maybe listening to classical music. The lights in his house glowed soft amber through the windows. At about 8 o'clock, something broke the quiet. Some neighbors later told police they heard a sharp, sudden pop, like a car backfiring, maybe 2 of them. No one thought much of it. Los Angeles makes noises like that all the time. But inside that house, Joseph Gatto was dying. When his daughter came to check on him the next day, the 13th, she found her father sitting slumped over his desk. She called her brother Mike. She wasn't sure if their father was okay or not, and Mike told her to stop wondering and to call an ambulance. 1 gunshot wound, close range. No forced entry, no sign of a struggle. His wallet was void of currency, but his credit cards remained. Some of the unique jewelry he had crafted was sitting out in plain sight, was untouched. Some, however, was missing. Artwork that was valuable remained hanging on the walls. The police arrived quickly, as did the medics, but there was little they could do. The paramedics pronounced him at the scene. The house, usually so full of color, became a crime scene marked by numbers and tape. Fingerprint powder was everywhere. Detectives photographed everything: his sketchbooks, the brushes, the faint blood spatter. A safe that looked like someone tried to open it with yard scissors. It didn't look random. It didn't look like a robbery. And yet, it didn't fit the pattern of a targeted killing either. The official record would later call it a homicide by firearm. Unsolved, no leads. For his family, especially his son Mike, the news came like a blow that rearranged the world. Mike Gatto was a California state assemblyman at the time, used to writing laws, not police reports, used to answer constituents, not detectives. Reporters quickly connected the dots. A lawmaker's father murdered in his home. The first statement Mike released was brief, controlled, the kind of measured tone you use when your world is burning and you're trying to stay professional. But behind that press release was a son who had lost his anchor. Friends would later say that Mike's grief looked different, quiet, analytical. He couldn't sit still. He retraced the timeline again and again, asking himself who would want to hurt his father. What had they missed? What detail was hiding in plain sight? The police, for their part, canvassed the block, interviewed neighbors, checked for surveillance footage. Nothing useful surfaced. Silver Lake's narrow streets are a patchwork of blind corners and old homes with no cameras. It was like the city itself had swallowed the killer. And in the days that followed, the media did what it always does. They wrote the story in headlines. Beloved art teacher found dead. Father of assemblyman murdered in home. But none of those words came close to what really happened. How a lifetime of art, patience, and purpose could end in a single moment of violence. Mike Gatto once wrote that in the weeks after the murder, he felt like the world had lost its color, that every shadow in Los Angeles looked like a threat. He'd drive the same streets his father drove, scanning alleys and overpasses, chasing ghosts. He started keeping notes, timelines, theories, not because he thought he could solve it, but because not knowing was worse. In his book, he later described that time as living in 2 worlds, daylight and noir. The lawmaker in public, the haunted son in private. While detectives filed paperwork and neighbors tried to forget, Mike Gatto couldn't. He didn't want to. The investigation was barely moving, and silence filled the gaps where answers should have been. And in that silence, something darker began to take shape. The realization that justice, even for a good man, doesn't always come. But before we get to that descent, before the grief hardened into obsession, it's important to understand what the police did find and what they didn't. Because the investigation into Joseph Gatto's death would become a masterclass in frustration, leads that went nowhere, evidence that refused to speak, and a city that moved on too quickly. After the first headlines faded, detectives chased what little the crime had left behind: shell casings, a partial footprint in dust, interviews that went nowhere. Weeks turned into months, then into years. The case file thickened, but not with answers. Mike Gatto pressed for updates, sometimes calling detectives daily. He was polite at first, then persistent, then angry. Their responsive grew thinner and more curt. "Oh, we're still working on leads. Nothing new yet. We'll call you when we know something." It was the language of dead ends. Mike began to fill the silence himself. Maps on the wall, photos of the street, timelines scribbled on legal pads. In Noir by Necessity, he would later call that time a self-assigned haunting. Each night he'd drive through Silver Lake, watching porches light and darken, wondering which window hid the person who pulled the trigger. Police floated theories: a burglary interrupted, a transient looking for cash, a car burglar, mistaken identity. None fit, and whoever did it had fired once, clean and close, like someone who wanted control, not chaos. The city kept moving, but for Mike, time stalled in his father's room, a room where no one was allowed. It was his personal space. Every political handshake, every committee meeting felt like a performance for an audience he no longer believed in. Justice, he realized, had deadlines only for the living. Grief changes temperature. It cools from shock into obsession. Mike wrote that he stopped seeing Los Angeles as his home. It had become evidence. Street lamps looked like interrogation lights. Every stranger's glance felt weighted. He studied unsolved murders across the city, patterns of randomness that weren't random at all. He learned the bureaucratic machinery of homicide: overworked units, budget cuts, untested evidence. The politics he once practiced now looked like another version of the same puzzle. People promising order in a world built on disorder. Friends urged him to let go. He couldn't. His father's sketchbooks were still on the table, open to half-drawn faces. In one, a self-portrait stared back with unfinished eyes. Mike wrote that he sometimes wondered if his father had left it that way on purpose, an invitation to finish what he started. But closure never came. The LAPD still lists the case as open, no arrests. The reward posters grew sun-bleached, their edges curling against telephone poles. Reporters stopped calling. Only anniversaries brought the story back into daylight, brief and obligatory. It's been 12 years, 12 years since Joseph Gatto, father, artist, teacher, was found slumped over his desk of his Silver Lake home. A single gunshot, no motive, no arrest. People move on. The city moves on. But Mike Gatto never did. He's written about it since, not to solve it, but he says to survive it. In Noir by Necessity, he called those first months a self-assigned haunting, a phrase that still hangs in the air like a smoke ring that never breaks. In the early mornings, before sunrise, Mike sometimes drives through Silver Lake, not looking for anything specific, just passing the places where the world once made sense. Coffee shops with graffiti that has changed hands 100 times. Storefronts now shuttered. The corner where his father used to buy supplies for his art classes. He doesn't stop. He just drives. Because stopping means remembering too clearly. He thinks about the people who still call it random, as if random is a comfort. But he can't accept that. Random is lazy. Random is what people say when they've given up on meaning. Mike has never been good at giving up on meaning. He keeps his father's sketchbooks on a shelf in his home office. Some days, he takes one down, runs a finger over the paper fibers, and imagines the sound of a pencil moving across them. That scratching sound, the sound of his father thinking, is what he misses most. He remembers that his father used to say, "Every line is a decision." Mike wonders if the one who pulled the trigger ever heard that, if they understood that one line can end a life. The case file sits somewhere in LAPD's cold case storage, its edges frayed with handling, its pages yellowing, a record of everything and nothing. He's learned the detectives' names by heart. Some retired, some reassigned. All left him with the same sentence, "We'll let you know." Years have a way of thinning promises. There was a time when he could recite every minute of that night, the timeline, the calls, the arrival of paramedics. Now, he only remembers the quiet, the way the house looked like a painting that someone had walked away from. He tried therapy, religion, work, but grief doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about titles or laws or elections. It just waits for you to slow down long enough to catch up. At the state assembly, Mike learned how to speak without feeling, how to shake hands with men who talked about public safety, while his father's killer walked free. He'd stand in front of a microphone and feel the words forming perfectly. Policy, budget, law. But inside, there was just one sentence repeating. Who did this? That question is still his heartbeat. When he wrote Noir by Necessity, he wasn't trying to write a book. He was trying to write his way back to his father. Each chapter a streetlight, each page a shadow. He called it Noir by Necessity because sometimes darkness is the only language grief understands. He doesn't believe in closure anymore. Closure is a myth sold to people who want happy endings. He believes in continuance, in living with the open wound and finding a way to walk away. Tonight, as the rain lets up, he pulls to the side of the road, on a hill, overlooking Silver Lake. The city is spread beneath him like a sheet of light. He thinks about how his father used to paint landscapes, not for beauty, but for truth. Every light needs a shadow, Joe used to say. Otherwise, you can't see where you are. Mike sits there for a while. He listens to the engine tick, and he wonders if the shadows remember more than the light ever will. He stays parked there longer than he should. The rain has stopped, but drops still slide down the windshield like a clock that forgot its numbers. Every few minutes, another car passes, headlights sweeping across the dashboard. In that brief glow, he catches his own reflection. Eyes that look older, warier, maybe more like his father's than he wants to admit. He thinks about how time can be cruel in small ways. It erases things that deserve to stay and keeps the things you'd rather forget. Sometimes, when he closes his eyes, he still sees his father's office, the fingerprint powder, the police tape, the sketchbook open to a half-drawn face. It comes without warning, like a photograph slipped under the door. He's learned to live with it, not by ignoring it, but by folding it into who he is. There's a line he wrote once in the margins of Noir by Necessity. Grief is a second city. Same map, same streets, but nothing leads where it used to. That's what Los Angeles has become for him. He drives the same routes he took before, but they've changed color. Gas stations feel colder. Stoplights linger too long. Even the skyline, that glowing promise of the city, feels like it's holding its breath. People sometimes tell him to move on. They mean well, but he wonders what that even means. Move where? To what? There's no on after murder. There's just forward, and forward feels like walking through fog. He tried once to go back to his father's house. The new owners had changed the paint, planted new trees, paved the driveway. But the shape of the windows was still the same. He parked on the opposite side of the street and sat there until someone inside turned off the porch light. Then he drove away, and he hasn't been back since. Every now and then he still hears from the police, a new detective assigned, another set of eyes on the same file. They're kind, careful with their words, but he knows the truth. Cold cases live up to their name. They cool until no one remembers the warmth that was lost. He wonders if the person who did it even remembers, if they tell themselves a story that makes it possible to sleep. Maybe they've built a life, a family, a new name. Maybe they walk through the same city he does, passing the same streetlights, never realizing that the son they left behind is still out there in the dark, trying to understand a single senseless moment. He once said the hardest part isn't that his father was killed, it's that the world kept turning like nothing happened. That was the moment he understood what indifference really feels like. In politics, he learned that systems don't feel, they process. They file, they log, they move on. Maybe cities are the same. Maybe they're built to forget because remembering every tragedy would break them. But Mike can't forget. He won't. His father taught him that the act of seeing, really seeing, is a responsibility. So he keeps looking at people, at streets, at silence. He says he still believes there's meaning somewhere in it all, even if it's buried deep. Maybe that's what keeps him going. Not faith in justice, but faith in pattern. His father believed every composition had balance, even if you couldn't see it yet. Maybe life works the same way. He thinks sometimes about what forgiveness would even look like. Would it feel like peace or just exhaustion? He isn't sure anymore. Some days, forgiveness feels like betrayal, like closing the door before the echo is done. He tells himself he's not obsessed, just awake. Awake to what grief really is, not a wound, but a mirror. It shows you what the world is capable of and what you are without the person who steadied you. People used to ask why he wrote about the darkness. He'd tell them it wasn't fascination, it was necessity. Because when the lights go out, you don't get to choose what you remember. You remember everything. There's a neighborhood mural downtown painted by one of his father's former students, a swirl of blues and reds, a figure reaching toward a blank canvas. Mike passes it sometimes and slows down, watching how the light shifts across the paint. It reminds him that his father's fingerprints still exist, not in evidence bags, but in people. That's the one comfort that never leaves. He once dreamed he found the man who killed his father, not through clues, not through confession, just recognition. In the dream, he asked one question: why? And the man answered, because I could. He woke up shaking. He realized that maybe the reason didn't matter, that maybe the point wasn't understanding evil, but refusing to let it define what came after. Years pass, the headlines grow quiet, new tragedies take the front page. But every November, when the air turns dry and the sun sets early, he feels it again. That vibration in his chest, that pause before memory arrives. He lights a candle. Sometimes he sketches. Sometimes he just sits in silence. He says it's strange how grief becomes ritual, how the act of remembering becomes its own form of prayer. He's stopped asking for closure. Now he just asks for meaning. He's learned that the world doesn't hand out justice. It hands out chances to keep living. And in that space between what's fair and what's real, he tries to build something new. There's a moment he writes about near the end of Noir by Necessity. Maybe we never solve it. Maybe the only victory is that we keep looking. That line is the heartbeat of his story. Sometimes he imagines his father walking beside him through the old art halls, the smell of paint and graphite in the air. He imagines him laughing, that quiet, knowing laugh that teachers have when they've seen it all and still believe. He imagines him saying, "You don't stop making art just because the world breaks a little." That's what keeps him alive, he thinks. The belief that beauty still matters, even when justice doesn't. The city below glows like spilled gold. Somewhere out there is the house where it happened. Somewhere out there is the person who pulled the trigger. And somewhere in between those 2 points is the sun, still watching, still remembering, still breathing in the same air that carries both guilt and grace. he doesn't know if he'll ever get answers. He looks out across Silver Lake. The water mirrors the sky, black on black. The reflection almost perfect. He whispers his father's name once, just to feel how it sounds in the quiet. Then he turns off the engine, steps into the cool air, and lets the silence have him. If someone has information or leads on the murder of Joseph Gatto, they should contact the Los Angeles Police Department Robbery-Homicide Division. Non-emergency tip line is 877-ASK-LAPD or 275-5273. Online contact page is contact.lapdonline@lapd.online. If you wish to remain anonymous, call LA Regional Crime Stoppers at 800-222-TIPS or 8477. It's best to mention the case by name and any relevant details such as date, time, location when providing a tip so that the investigators can reference the correct file. Now, not to worry if you didn't have a chance to write all that down. I will have all of that information in the show notes. I gotta tell you, Christine, my heart breaks for Mike and his family. You and I have both lost our fathers, our anchors, the ones who formed us into who we are. I lost mine suddenly from a massive heart attack, so I understand what sudden loss feels like. But to have my father murdered senselessly and for justice to still not have been handed to the one who did it is something I will never know. And I hope and pray that telling the story of who Joseph was and what he meant to his family will inspire that one to come forward. That's all we need. We just need one.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, sudden loss is one thing, but sudden loss because of a crime or a mystery left behind that sudden loss, that has got to be a whole nother level of grief, confusion, frustration. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to fathom knowing how that feels, thankfully. But tragedy, it hits us all in different shapes and forms. And I am of the mindset that, there's not always going to be easy solutions or paths paved with lights on them to show you which way to go or how to be or how to feel or, any of that. But I think there's always lessons learned. The son ended up writing a book. And I think that through writing that book, those were other things that were gifted to him, kind of like a balance, like a checks and balance kind of thing. But I think he was gifted with other things because of this tragedy and because of the frustration and loss that he will never be able to account for. Lessons learned from any experience in life, that's all you really can ask for. You can't always ask for, in this case, the justice to pan out. I hope it does. I hope someone reaches out, and you told the story beautifully. You gave a lot of details, and we're going to get to talk to him. So maybe that'll help us a little bit too. But even if it never comes to pass, that this crime has never been solved, I think the grace is all of the other things that came out of this. And quite possibly a different kind of connection that he probably has with his father. That's really what I was sitting with the whole time you were telling the story. I was like, you know what? There's grief and devastation and frustration and all of those things. But then there's a lot of other good things that are seeming to blossom.
Right. One of the things Mike talks about in his book, and there's so much more detail. I mean, I really recommend his book because he really goes through all the steps and it blows my mind. But it's exactly what I would do in pursuit of justice for my father if this happened to my dad. And in the book, he, looks back at his father worked so hard. I didn't say it in the story, but this man worked all the time to make sure that his children had what they needed. Like, he worked 3 jobs, and then he would work at the ballpark at night so that all of his children had the opportunity for a better life and to go to college. And once Mike because Mike has 3 children, 2 of whom got to at least meet Mike's dad, but the third, a son, was born after his father passed. And he remembers how much joy his father had with his children, how much time he was able to give to his grandchildren, and always telling Mike to basically stop and smell the roses, Mike. He always makes time. He remembers those things about his dad, the unending pursuit that this man does. I mean, even reaching out to us. I mean, who are we? Who are we? We're a small podcast.
Yeah, but you never know. No stone unturned. And I commend him for that. Really, not everybody can do that.
Yeah. You know what I'm really looking forward to, Christine, is I'm looking forward to what's up next. We are going to interview Mike Gatto. We have a handful of questions for him, and we're going to see where the interview takes us.
This is going to be our first official interview, like where we have an actual interviewee that we're going to be asking questions of on our podcast. Look at us actually podcasting with interviews. What?
I know. I'm very much looking forward to it. So here we go. Our interview with Mike Gatto. With us today, we have Joseph's son, Mike Gatto. Welcome to the show, Mike, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
It's nice to be here.
I would also like to say thank you for trusting me to share your father's story. I am absolutely honored. So, super quick question. How did you find us, and what inspired you to reach out?
Well, so I believe after having lived in this space for the last almost 12 years, that there is a very dedicated group of people who help solve cold cases like my dad's. I guess this universe of people are people who, number one, realize that there's a lot of cold cases out there. Number two, care about cold cases. And number three, do something about it or, express an interest in it. And that universe really includes a lot of podcast hosts like you and, your audience, people who care about true crime, people who, are like me, where something just bothers you when a case goes unsolved, whether it's one close to you or one that, involves a stranger. And so we were sort of searching for different podcasts that fit this description, and we came across yours, and we just think that you do a really, really good job with how you handle these cases and what it means to the victims and their families.
Oh, wow. That makes me feel so good inside, because that's what we want to do. We want to tell these stories because they are important that they're told and that these people are not forgotten. But to have the opportunity to possibly be able to reach that one person out there that could hopefully make a change, to bring someone to justice, that is my ultimate goal. So I just think that's really fantastic. So thank you, and thank you to your team. Now, Christine and I have some questions for you. So if you're ready, let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
All right.
I was wondering, especially with your father being an artist and all of that, and having lost my own father, not to a tragedy, but just the loss in and of itself. When you think of your father's legacy or your father, what image or moment comes to mind first?
That's a great question. So my father was a Renaissance man, and, I would sometimes say like a throwback, and also somebody who you really don't meet too much anymore. Now, I try to live my life this way too, but I think every generation gets a little weaker and a little less diverse. And what I mean by that is my father was so many things. He had so much knowledge. He's the type of guy who could, take apart a Chevy engine with me and then go inside and paint like a very, very good painting. He could, he was very much a guy's guy. He served in the Army. He was very no nonsense. He, very much a guy's guy. But then he could also like talk with you about how to prune a peach tree and get the maximum yield of fruit, and like how much that it showed his soft side. And so he was just such a Renaissance man that I believe that's how he should be remembered, and it's how I think of him. He was so multidimensional and so well. He had just such profound knowledge in so many things, whether it was like woodworking or restoring furniture or whether it was art, that you really don't meet people like that anymore. You tend to meet people who are specialized. They know a lot about one little thing. And, folks who might be in art might be like, oh, I don't know how to take apart a Chevy engine, right? But like my dad was just different. And that is something that I think that type of Renaissance man is, they no longer exist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As you were answering that question, I couldn't help about thinking about an area in your book where you talked about, your dad didn't like to see all the fruit being wasted on people's trees, like they weren't picking them, and like you guys, right? So the whole olive story was the best.
It was a very memorable experience.
Yeah, would you mind sharing that?
Sure. So my father really loved eating healthy, and he sort of predated the whole organic or local movement by many decades. And for a long time, aside from like wheat in our bread, he grew all the produce we ate. He had a very modest sized backyard. It was not big by any stretch, but he had a peach tree, an apricot tree, a plum tree, an apple tree, a pear tree. He had, broccoli and kale and tomatoes and beans and like everything. It was amazing. But I was serving in the California legislature, and we lived, up in Northern California for 7 years. We lived in a neighborhood that had a lot of old olive trees. It had been previously olive farms, and now there were houses there, but some of the old olive trees were still there. And he came to visit one time, and, I was like, gosh, like, I wonder how olive oil is made or something like that. He's like, well, let's go make some. And so we went around and just picked olives on people's property. I mean, nobody really cared. We got a whole bunch of olives, and we did our best to crush them and strain them. And I think we used old socks and like coffee filters and all sorts of different things. But it was really funny. At the end of it all, we got some usable olive oil. And I'll tell you, a funny thing, because, with parents, right, there's always things that we don't like, and there's things that we do like. I really like this quality of my dad. And during the pandemic, when everybody was stuck at home, what I did, and people laugh at me for this, but I made a map of all the unloved fruit trees in our neighborhood where they were hanging over the street, so as anybody's, anybody could go pick. And I counted, like 106 different fruit trees, and I mapped where they are and what type and when they were in season. And so now I can walk around my immediate neighborhood and I can get, persimmons and oranges and whatever people are not picking too. So I kind of like that quality in my dad. I really like that quality in my dad, and I try to live like that too.
Yeah, I absolutely love that you guys did that. And I could just see it in my mind, and I'm thinking, it's funny, I was just going through the airport, and I don't know why, but the whole olive thing popped into my mind then too. And I'm like, I wonder if I could do that. It might be quite messy.
You absolutely could. Yeah, it's messy, but you can do it.
Actually, I'm going to interject here. I love the fact that Tracy is geeking out about the whole gardening and the whole, nature and balance and all that. But I don't know why, when you were explaining your father as the Renaissance man, I was immediately becoming a fan of your father, because one of the things that I kind of push all the time is the balance of the masculine and feminine energies, and being truly authentic to oneself is being able to be secure enough in yourself, no matter what sexuality you are. To be able to be balanced is a measure of true authenticity. So while you were saying all of that, that is what I was resonating with. Like, he was
Bless you for saying that. I know that's not, necessarily the topic of our podcast, but I believe that so strongly as well. And, the people who are most secure are absolutely comfortable exploring, all those different sides and expressing them. And because it's like, look, I mean, I am who I am. I know who I am. And so I have no problem, expressing different sides of me because I know who I am and I'm secure in it.
Yeah, that is one of the main reasons why I truly love artists, even without knowing them, because they are the types of people that are usually good with that. And I resonate with that. So, yeah, that's cool.
So, can you tell me, Mike, about your father as a teacher? What kind of influence did he have on his students?
Well, the first thing to know about my father as a teacher was how dedicated he was. My father worked 47 years as a teacher and did not miss a single day of school. I want to repeat that. 47 years, verified by the school district, did not miss a single day of school. You think about it, in 47 years, going to work, not getting sick, not having any excuses, always going to work for your students. That's the first thing. It's so unbelievable. But again, it was verified by the school district at his retirement. It's just amazing how dedicated he was. Secondly, if you know anything about pensions, my father, counting his military service and counting how long he worked, during the last several years, he was working for free, meaning he could have retired and had 100% of his salary for not working, but he continued to work for free. So that also tells people about how dedicated he was. And then the final thing about how much he was beloved, I could tell you about all his students that he mentored. He had a student who went on to paint the official portrait in the White House for a president. He had a student who went on to design the Mazda Miata. He had students who went on to become famous pop stars and famous actors and actresses. I should back up and say he founded an art school, and that's why everything is arts focused. But the other biggest thing that sort of I think shows what a good teacher he was when we had his funeral, there were about 1,200 people packed in a church that seats, 300 max. And, at some point I just said, hey, anybody who is one of my father's students, please get up. And it was about 3/4 of the audience. And just think about that. People who he had taught in some cases many decades before, and he still meant enough to him, or he still meant enough to them that they showed up to his funeral. In some cases, decades later.
That speaks volumes. I absolutely have shivers down my back.
That's a hard act to follow, as the son. They always say we kind of live in our parents' shadow. But what lessons or habits from your father still show up in your daily life today? Like, I hope you take a sick day when you need it and you're not 47 without falling out and having a day of rest. But what lessons or habits from him?
This is yeah, sure. That's a great question. So, one of the manifest ironies in my father's life was that he always told me that I worked harder than he did. And he would always tell me, Michael, you got to smell the roses. What are you doing out there? It was like, Dad, you had 3 jobs when I was growing up, but I think there's a part of him that wanted me not to make the same mistakes he did. So I have worked very hard to be present in my children's lives. My father did come from a different generation. He was chasing the demons of poverty and not having enough when he was growing up. So that was his first and foremost way that he felt like he could provide. I've worked very hard to listen to his advice and to make sure that I'm present and to, attend every Little League game and every practice and everything for recitals with my 3 children. The lessons that I've learned from him, treat people right, try to be as dedicated as you can to your craft. And, most of all, try to live a diverse life that is filled with travel and different experiences and wonder and joy. And, those are just simple lessons that he taught me, but I try to live each and every day of my life.
What do they say? Work hard, play harder. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And with every generation, hopefully we'll keep getting it better and better. So yeah, that's cool.
Let's hope.
Yeah. And when you first, so we're going to kind of dive in a little bit here, Mike. When you first heard what had happened, what details have stayed with you the most clearly?
Well, I don't know if you're asking about the emotional details or the crime details. I'm happy to talk a little bit about both. Okay. So, for the emotional details of my father's murder, and this is something I try to talk about a lot in my book, Thankfully, this is something that most of your viewers will never experience, and most of my readers will never experience. But I want to give them a little window into what it's like so that they can approach how they make policy-making decisions and vote decisions and things like that with respect to victims' families. So the first thing about a murder that, I learned, and it sounds obvious in retrospect, but often we all know that at some point our parents will pass away, and we hope it never comes, but we know it will. Most of the time, you have a chance to have conversations with them and to guide them into the next phase of their life, and to talk with them and ask them all the questions you never had a chance to ask them. A murder is just so sudden. Again, it sounds obvious, but like one day I was talking with my dad about good plumbers, and the next day he was gone. And for the longest time, about a month, I had to keep a copy of the newspaper on my nightstand, because I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would be in disbelief that this had happened. I had seen about stuff like that in movies, never really thought that type of thing could happen, but I literally would wake up and be like, oh, it's all a bad dream. And I was like, no, it's not a bad dream. Mm-hmm. In terms of crime scene details, there's so much with my father's case that does not make sense. His house was partially ransacked, and yet a lot of valuables were just not taken. Some of the things that were, that his assailants apparently tried to get at seemed to be more paperwork related than, valuable related. My father's case is literally one of those cases that makes even veteran detectives shake their head and scratch their heads, because there's so many details. We could literally spend an hour in terms of like what doesn't make sense. And I guess I'll close with saying that, with my dad's murder, like his assailant or assailants did some things that seem really stupid and really brazen and really crazy and really careless. And yet it's been 12 years and they haven't been caught, which makes it sound really well planned and really well thought out, and that they're really clever. And so, my father's case has confounded me all of these years, and I think it confounds anybody who reads the book and listens to, or will listen to this podcast.
Yeah, that leads me to the question of like how did the following days and weeks reshape your own sense of safety, personally, professionally? Especially because you were in politics and the whole document issue and questions that came up with that. How did those following weeks, days, months reshape your sense of safety, personally, professionally, within your community?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So at first, I talked about this a little bit. We assumed that his killing might have been politically related. The police have, reassured me that they don't think it was. Although, you can't succeed in politics without making some enemies. And I certainly had my share. Thankfully, in 2013, the political situation wasn't quite as nasty as it is now. But I still had people who, certainly wished me ill. In terms of behavioral changes that were really interesting, for the longest time, the police, I think to this day, they still think that my father's assailant could have gotten in through his garage door as he was closing it. And you think about like all the times where, all of us, we come back after going to the market and we just click the garage door and we don't turn around and make sure that it's closed and that like nobody's coming in. For the longest time, I was like paranoid. I would like sit there and make sure that the garage door was closed and no one walked in my garage. And that is something that it still burbles up, 12 years later. And even though, it's not even necessarily conclusive that that's how my father's killer got in his house. The other thing that was a weird behavioral change is that, you really, like, I noticed how many American TV shows feature killing as like a prominent part of the show. My wife would sit down and be like, let's watch TV, once the kids were put to bed. And it was like, well, what are the cult shows that everyone's watching? And it's like, well, here's How to Get Away with Murder, and here's like blah blah blah, and here's and I was just like, oh my gosh, like, and even if you watch like a spy show, it's like, how many episodes feature somebody getting shot with a handgun, right? And for the first couple months, it was really hard for me to watch television because it just brought back thoughts that I didn't necessarily want to have when I was relaxing, and so it just. it definitely changed my behavior quite a bit. And when in terms of safety now, like I'm just way more attuned to safety for our house and, what it means to me and my family.
Yeah, I totally get that. It would definitely make you have your head on a swivel.
Yeah, I would be the same. What did the early investigation feel like from your side? Were there moments of hope, or was it mostly frustration?
Well, I can tell you that everybody, and this is something I've confirmed with so many families of murder victims since I was ushered into this world, every family of a murder victim thinks the case will be solved like in a week. Mm-hmm. Part of it is just, expectations. Part of it is hope. Part of it is we all watch the same TV shows where, CSI effect, right? Things are buttoned up within an hour with a few commercial breaks and, using modern technology and some amazing break, right? And never in a million years did I think we would be talking about my father's case as a cold case. During the early days, the police I should back up and say, and tell me if this is repeating stuff that you might have gone into already, but during the very, very early days of the case, because of a comment that a neighbor made, the media focused on whether the Russian mafia killed my father. And it was because my father was about to give a talk on a very obscure type of painting. And the flyer had advertised, Joe Gatto is going to show up with his rare specimens of this type of painting. Now, I should stress these were not Van Goghs. They're not worth millions of dollars. They were worth a few $1,000s. And on top of that, whoever killed my dad walked right past several of them in his house. So the police quickly disposed of that theory as well. What the police quickly focused on was another theory that made the rounds in my father's neighborhood and the media, which was that my father was killed by a car burglar who was seen breaking into cars nearby. That theory dominated probably the first 7 years of my father's case. And now I feel like a fool for going out there and, communicating it to the public so strongly. Basically what happened is a mother was coming home from karate with her son, and she saw a guy breaking into cars. Now, already it's kind of weird that someone was breaking into cars on a very narrow street right when people are coming home from school and work. Like, very strange, right? But then she and a neighbor, allegedly tried to chase this guy, and he allegedly said something like, "Follow me and I'll kill you," or something like that. And then he went running off in the general direction of my dad's street. The police for the longest time were like, well, when I see a horse running through the neighborhood, I don't go looking for no unicorn. And I was thinking like, well, wait a minute. Like, there's someone breaking into a car, within 10 blocks of just about any house in Los Angeles at all times. I mean, that's just the reality in big cities. Like, so drawing too much of an inference or a coincidence to that is probably a mistake. But this is where the theory gets really weird. I asked the police, well, tell me how this makes sense. Tell me how this works for you. Give me the profile of this guy. And so what I'm about to say is their profile. They said, well, Mike, he ran away from these people were chasing him, and he was right-handed, and most people who were being chased, if they're right-handed, they turned to the right, and that was toward your dad's home. And then, he saw your dad's street, and your dad's street was really small, and he thought it was an alley, and so he went down your dad's street. And right at that exact moment, a tour helicopter was taking tourists to see the Hollywood sign, and your father's house was in the flight path. But he thought it was a police helicopter, and he said, "I've got to get inside." And right at that exact moment, your dad had purchased a printer at Costco, and he had realized he could not get it out of the side door of his car, so he had to open the hatchback. So he opened his garage door. And right at that exact moment, when he closed the garage door, noticed this guy darting the garage. And your dad closed the garage door, and this guy sat in his garage for an hour. And your dad sat there and worked on setting up his printer, sent a few emails, and this guy sat in your dad's garage for an hour. And this explains why there's no forced entry, Mike. And he sat in your dad's garage for an hour, hour and a half, and didn't steal anything from the garage. Didn't walk out, didn't try to steal one of the 3 cars that were present. Didn't take the tools or other valuables. Didn't go in the other two stories of a 3-story house and try to take valuables there. But no, instead he walked up to the 3rd story of a clearly inhabited house with 3 cars there without knowing who those 3 cars belonged to, and decided to walk in and shoot your dad. This was the theory, that they rolled with for so long. And I dutifully went to the public and said, hey, there's a sketch of this guy. I later learned that the only person who nobody could see his face, and the only person when pressed who made the sketch or who dictated the sketch was the young boy. And even he was not sure of the guy's face. I mean, there's so many things that are like wrong with this. And I should also mention that for this theory to work, this person would have had to have shot my father and sat there and watched him die, and then calmly tried to ransack his bedroom and then left. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I couldn't agree more. That is the wonkiest tale I've ever heard. None of it makes sense.
Do you remember a specific turning point when you realized this might become a cold case? But I kind of feel like with the realization of that may have been when you realized this was going to be a cold case, after they chased down a theory that just didn't make sense to you?
No, it took years for me to realize that this was going to be a cold case. Because, for the first couple of years, it was like, they were like rousting known criminals and seeing if anybody was going to talk and offering rewards and, doing all these things. But then, at some point, I just concluded they seem to be waiting for a break. They seem a little too dependent on DNA. They don't seem like they want to do the traditional, like, shoe leather police work. And this case, we're not getting breaks, folks. I mean, 2 years can go by and you can talk yourself into, it's just going to be a little bit longer. But then 3 years and 4 years and 5 years and 10 years. And at some point, it's like, wow, this is a cold case. It's going to take an absolute catalyst to try to get this case solved.
That's the thing that really sticks in my craw, is when the tunnel vision occurs, because that's exactly what it feels like to me. Is, like you mentioned, they didn't do the gumshoe work, hitting the streets, really digging in, doing the investigating, talking to everyone they could. And I do recall seeing that sketch, and I guess I just didn't remember that sketch came from a child.
Yeah, it came from a child, and more significantly, 2 adults had said, oh, it was dark. There was no way we could have seen his face. No way we could draw a sketch. And this came from a child. And, the sketch just ends up looking like a generic European or Hispanic guy. And, and I went out there before the public and all these press conferences, and I was like, if you've seen this guy, it's like, I mean, in retrospect, I think everybody's seen a guy who looks like that. And so it was very unfortunate.
I really hope you don't beat yourself up about delivering that, because that is what you were given. And when you are in such a state, I mean, you're going to hang on to that. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So please don't beat.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, you were doing the best you could. Now, what has been the most challenging part of trying to keep this case alive over all these years for you, Mike?
Great question. So, I wrote the book that I wrote for 2 reasons. Number one was because I do believe, as I said at the beginning of this interview, I do believe in the true crime audience. And I believe that there are people out there who care about these cases, and they have ideas. And sometimes, if you're in the right audience, there might be somebody in a city who even has information. And that was like a selfish reason. But the second reason why I wrote this book was really for all the other families of murder victims out there who are so challenged every day with keeping their cases alive. There are so many cold cases out there. In every jurisdiction around the country, between 50 and 60% of murders go unsolved. And I just want that to sink in. Like, roughly half of the families of murder victims never get justice. They never get answers. And we disrespect the dead that way. And now you think about this. I have this tremendous platform, right? I'm on national TV twice a week. I have a very healthy Twitter following. I can go on platforms like yours. There's people like you who are kind enough to have me. And, Dateline NBC did a story on my dad. And again, it's been a challenge for me to keep this case active, and this case, and to keep the police working on it, and to keep the public, thinking about it. And then you just imagine all the other people out there who are not so lucky. So everything has been hard for me. But I also realize that I'm so lucky compared to other families. And so when I talk about this, I really want to focus on them. Anybody you know, if you know anybody who has been murdered, talk with their family, talk with the police, encourage them to keep the case alive. Because only by holding our feet to the fire can we say to, society as a whole, this unsolved murder rate is completely unacceptable. Our government needs to dedicate the resources, and our police forces need to, change certain investigation techniques or whatever, so that murder closure rate can go up.
I had no idea that the percentage was that high.
It's almost like we don't want to say that too much so people don't think that they can get away with murder. But at the same time, that's a staggering statistic.
Yeah, and by the way, that rate, the murder closure rate, has gone down in the era of DNA. And again, worth repeating that back in the day when detectives did the traditional things, which is, talking with the community, talking with neighbors, talking with friends, talking with suspects, waiting until somebody said something that gave you a hunch that led you to solve the case. More murders were solved when that was all that they had. And now with all the fingerprint technology, we have all the DNA technology, all the cameras, the surveillance cameras and video cameras, the murder clearance rate has gone down, not up in this modern era.
And unfortunately, this horrible circumstance has kind of made you a subject matter expert on all of this. But how has your background in public service shaped your understanding of how investigations stall or succeed?
Yeah, great question. So I feel like I have been thrust, and I've learned more about DNA in these last 12 years than I thought I'd ever know. I guess having been in government, in and out of government for so many decades, I understand that the enemy is not just bad apples. You can always, in any big organization, you're going to have people who care about their jobs and people who don't. But the enemy really is the bureaucracy itself. Different police departments around the country have widely different policies when it comes to seeking help and when it comes to, how they approach unsolved cases. And it's amazing because, I've talked to so many other families of murder victims, and you'll ask the police department or sheriff's department, hey, can we try this? And you're like, no, our policy is that we don't do that. And it's like, well, why? And so really just the bureaucracy can sometimes get in the way of, creative crime solving. That's what I've learned.
Have you found that the system treats victims' families differently once public attention fades?
Absolutely. There are certain cases that capture the public eye and they capture the media's attention and, the public's attention. And those cases captivate and they enthrall, and, resources are thrown until, somebody's arrested. And you think about the OJ case and the Night Stalker case and, all these famous murders, particularly in Los Angeles and Hollywood, right? But then, when the cameras turn off and when people forget, or if no cameras were ever summoned at all, then I think it's a lot more easy for a police force to, put the evidence in a storage locker somewhere and say, well, maybe a break will come, maybe someone will do a deathbed confession 60 years from now. But that case is not moving forward.
What kind of changes would you like to see in how unsolved cases are handled in California, with all that being said?
Well, despite my comments about, DNA, I do believe that there's a lot of unprocessed DNA for murders and rapes. That's obviously where DNA is most common. And I believe there have been a lot of advances that would probably allow a good percentage of these cases to be solved. So I'd like to see the federal government devote money to give to grants to all police forces around the country, rich and poor, urban and rural, north and south, east and west, to process this backlog of DNA, or in some cases, reprocess it. There are people who get away with murder, and there are victims waiting for answers, and I think this is low-hanging fruit. Let the science do it. The technology exists. Let's come together as a society and agree that this is important. The second step is really stuff you have to teach. It's not like anything that government can do. You have to chiefs of detectives all around the country have to teach their detectives. You know what? I know DNA is cool, and I know we've got new fingerprint technology, and I know there's surveillance cameras and all sorts of new technology, but like a lot of murders are just solved by talking to the community, and it's a pain. And, people break their appointments and they don't call you back. But, that type of old gumshoe work is also very valuable. And that's sort of a cultural change that I'd like to see in police departments.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, because it is beating the street. It's the feeling that you get when you're talking to someone, the different directions you could go just based on that conversation versus just the DNA technology that's out there, which, by the way, is extremely expensive. So I agree with you. I would love to see money given to every department so that we could make better use of all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, in your book, Noir by Necessity, you wrote about grief as a kind of landscape. Has that landscape changed for you with time?
Yes. So good news for anybody who is going through grief and is listening. Grief does diminish over time. Sometimes you have to make a decision that you are not going to let the grief control your life and consume you. For the first year after my father died, I was a wreck. I was just a wreck. It was, and I think part of it was that I was in the public eye. And so literally every day, somebody would ask me about my dad's case 5 or 6 times. Like, I could not escape it. Right? If I did a media interview about a cool piece of legislation that I was working on, at the end of the interview, the television station would say, and by the way, any news on your dad's case? And, when you're a politician, and by definition, you're giving speeches to 500,000 people a day, and you're shaking 500,000 hands a week. You encounter a lot of people, and they all meant very well. And they would say, any break in your dad's case, right? So even if I wanted to forget it, I couldn't for that first year. But at some point, I had to make a decision that I was going to try very hard to keep plugging along and to not let grief consume me. Does it bubble up after years? Of course it does. There have been many moments, mostly connected with my children, where, my oldest child will create a piece of art that I would think, gosh, Gramps would have loved to see that. Or my youngest child, my son, who's named after my father and who he never got to meet, who, he'll do something that, it's like, man, you never met your grandfather, but you just did something that was exactly how he would have done it, right? And you'll get sad for a moment. You'll get sad at the fact that he never got to spend this time with them and they never got to really know him. But grief does diminish over time. Anger, I still have a lot of anger about my father's case. It also diminishes a little bit. With an unsolved case, there's still this sense of unfinished business. I can't really articulate well, but you want to know why, how. You want to know all the reporters' questions, like, how could this happen? Why did this happen? How did it happen? And those are things that I describe as sort of like an open wound. It's not necessarily grief related, but it is definitely related to the case.
Do you believe that the healing is possible without justice, or are they forever connected?
I've studied this a little bit, and I've tried to, think about it. People have asked me too, what would happen if your father's case is never solved? Are you ready for that? A lot of murders go unsolved. We just talk about the statistics. And I've also thought about what would happen if it is solved? Could I look his killer or killers in the eye? Could I forgive them? Right? Look, one thing that was recently in the news, of course, was Charlie Kirk's wife got up in front of a huge crowd and she said, I forgive my husband's killer. And you could tell the pain she was going through and the mixed emotions. And I understand, though, that is sort of, the Judeo-Christian ideal, right? Is you forgive everybody, even somebody who does something this awful. But your question was, do I think that I could?
Do you believe that healing is possible? Yeah, without justice.
I don't know. I don't know. I like to think that I could be, somebody who is a completely functional person in the world. But I think there will always be this question, and this is assuming that if there is not justice, there would always be a question in my mind: who, why, how, all those things. And that part would not heal.
Yeah, I totally get that. I, of course, have not experienced what you have, but with my experience and my own loss, I've come to think that grief shifts and forms, yet it endures unchanged. But within that shifting, there's totally it's totally possible to have moments of pure joy in their memory and have it not be tainted. So
that makes sense.
I think that in it, grief always endures, but it changes over time. It shifts. And with the murder being involved, I was wondering from that perspective, if you can ever really just sit in those moments of joy and those memories of your father. It sounds like you do. So I'm happy for that, at least.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I am too. And, you know, I hear people do that all the time where they forgive people. I don't know if I'm just not a good person. I don't know if I could do that. Tell someone that did something like that I forgive them. I don't know.
That's how I feel too. It's like, you know, you never know until you're placed in that situation. Mm-hmm. But I like if you ask me to answer that question now, I would say I don't think I can. Not at this moment.
Yeah. To me, it would be like swallowing razor blades. Forgive them for doing that. I don't know. No.
I don't know if I'd call it forgiveness, other than just not ever giving them energy or thought. I would really push them out of my mind as much as possible.
And I suppose in my father's case, right, and I talk about this a little bit in like the last chapter of the book, I suppose it would depend on like the circumstances of his death. Like, again, if this ended up being, you know, an old guy of my father's generation with dementia who went over to his house because, you know, he thought my father had cheated him in a jewelry transaction or something. And the guy had, you know, advanced dementia and he didn't know what he was doing. And, you know, like my father and him like wrestled over the gun or something like that. Well, that's one thing. But if this was like where somebody killed my father for financial gain, and it was like a premeditated killing, you know, to try to take advantage of him or, you know, his estate or something like that, well, that's another thing. And so, you know, there's, you know, like I could possibly forgive the old guy who had dementia and had no idea what he was doing. Mm-hmm. But the second thing, that would be very, very hard for me to forgive.
Right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that theory, Mike. And then it makes me think, well, heck, by the time they got there, maybe they would have forgotten.
Yeah, seriously.
You know, there was one thing that Tracy, you know, because my portion of this podcast is I kind of just listen to Tracy's stories and then I give my vibes or my quips, and I really try to lighten it up because I am one of those, you know, steer towards the positive at all times, but of course we have to pay attention to the negative things in this world. So that's kind of my shtick, so to speak, on this podcast. But what kind of sat with me is there was one moment where Tracy spoke about how there were pry marks on the safe, but she never went into what was in that safe. And my curiosity cannot stand what was actually in the safe.
Well, so a couple things were, you know, gotten into or attempted to get into at my father's house. One was a wooden file cabinet that had 2 drawers. So it was a big, tall file cabinet, but it was a wooden file cabinet. Someone had hacked into that. And my father had it locked. And so I suppose it's possible someone thought that there were valuables in that. Someone had hacked into that file cabinet and taken something. We don't really know what. And to this day, like I didn't have conversations with my dad about like what was in the wooden file cabinet. Yeah. In the safe, they were not able to get into the safe. The assailants made a big show of trying to get into, and this is also something that doesn't really make sense with the crime. But my father had these safes in his house, and these were like Old West, like Wells Fargo Western movie safes that were like, you know, as thick as a human hand and like half as tall as a human, like. But somebody had tried to get into them, or made a show of trying to get into them with garden shears and a crowbar, or like a weak prying bar, like not even a full strength crowbar. Now again, like if your listeners don't have experience with safes, I still think most people would understand you're not going to get into a safe, even a weak safe, with a pair of garden scissors, right?
Right.
And yet somebody had tried to do this or made a show of trying to do this. And that's why, in the book, I talk about how the detectives say that, it's a possibility that the crime scene was staged. Because, again, like when I said at the beginning, like things are either like really simple and somebody was really stupid and maybe high on drugs, or somebody's really clever and trying to make it look a certain way. This is what I put in that category. Because, I don't care how high on drugs you are, like trying to break into a safe with like 6-inch walls with a crowbar even, you're not getting into that safe. You're just not. Now, you asked what was in the safe. So we got it, my father's children, so me and my two sisters, we had to pay to get it drilled into. And I think what ended up being in there was like, there were some papers, like estate planning stuff. There were some valuables. There was like, gold and like gold coins and things like that. And there were some like, some jewelry and stuff like that. But, that's one of the ironies of all this is my father was not a wealthy man. And, to the extent that someone thought that they were going to get away with a whole bunch of valuables from his house. I mean, we're talking maybe, a few tens of thousands of dollars, not like those people who have, like $600,000 cash at their house. That was not my dad.
Right. Here's an opportunity for me to inject a little levity. The whole fact that they were trying to get into the safe, if it was a crackhead, I mean, that kind of tracks for crackhead mentality.
Yep. Yep. I agree. Yeah, that's what the police say too. Yeah. I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Well, and the other thing is too, as you mentioned, Mike, there was valuable art on the walls. There was jewelry sitting out in plain sight. So there's just so much of it.
Electronics, iPads, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the stuff they grab, right? So again, that just doesn't add up. It's just absolutely bonkers, the direction.
Yeah. And it does totally point to that this was just a bumbling idiot.
Yeah, I can tell you the theory that I favor lately, just because I've talked about it with so many people, is sometimes when I talk and I say, there are some things that are very smart and some things that are really dumb, people say to me, well, that means that there were two people there. That somebody was doing the smart stuff and somebody was doing the dumb stuff, right? You could almost imagine somebody going to my dad's house who knew him to confront him about something, or to get something, or to find something. And bringing somebody has muscle who is not so smart. And you could even imagine like a gun going off, right? And like one of them saying, I'm out of here. And the other one staying around because, the muscle is poor and on drugs and being like, oh, I'm going to try to get in the safe, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there's so many different permutations about this, but this is what I keep coming back to. The dumb crackhead who is out there breaking into cars when people are coming home from work and school. The dumb crackhead who is so stupid as to try to break into a safe with a pair of garden shears. That type of person gets caught. That person talks. That person brags. That person reoffends. And the fact that 12 years have passed, right? I mean, like, we all hear stories where, like, there's some criminal who gets into a fight with one of his criminal friends and says, don't fight with me because I'm tough. I killed a man. And then later, his friend gets arrested, and to get a lenient sentence, his friend rats him out.
Right.
Yeah. Another thought that just bantered around my brain was, did they ever look into any of his students? Because some of this and, some of what's in your book, and my imagination, of course, because it runs wild, because I'm a little cuckoo bird, but it makes me think, kind of sounds like someone knew him a little bit, but maybe not completely. So it lends to possibly a student of his that had a screw loose somewhere, believed your father to be more affluent or whatever, and went to him for one thing and got frustrated. I don't know. Of course, my imagination runs wild like everyone's, and we imagine and put things, in there. But have they ever looked into any of his students or anyone that he may have been mentoring? Or
I'm not aware that they have. They certainly, they did all the things. They pulled his call records and everything like that. But you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's the difficulty of a case like this, right? In theory, somebody could have just knocked on his door and been like, oh, hey, Mr. Gatto, like, you remember me, I had you in, advanced drawing, 20 years ago. And my dad would be like, yeah, come on in, have a cup of coffee, right? And if that person, like you said, had a screw loose and, thought, gee, he's got money and I'm going to act, who knows what could have happened. But again, there's so many parts of the case that are weird. My dad never let guests up into his third floor. Only family went up there, only very, very close people to him. He never. And so, like, the idea that, like, he'd let somebody up there and, like, they get into the argument up there and then, like, it just doesn't make sense. There's just too much that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. One of the things I remember in your book, Mike, is you were talking about the absolute beast that your dad was. I mean, he was one heck of a strong man, even in his 70s, right?
Yes.
So
he had bone structure that is, just really big bones, really strong muscles without working out, and, tremendous hand strength, tremendous grip strength. He was not somebody, even in his age, that I think could have been messed around with.
Right. So the theory of more than one, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and another thing, that's why my brain goes to, those details are part of why my brain went to, perhaps it was somebody that he quasi-knew. Because when you are a very self-assured and confident person, you are a little less likely to feel unsafe. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm wording that right.
No, you let your guard down around people, I mean, that is
right.
That is something, I mean, I think I mentioned in the book, I got contacted by a statistician at some point, and I don't always remember the stat, but I mean, he told me, he said, when an elderly person is killed in their home, they know the person who did it 99% of the time. And you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like, elderly people are not out there, getting into arguments at nightclubs. They're not out there, hanging out at street races at 2 a.m. Like, if someone comes in their home, it's usually somebody they know. They open the door to somebody they know. That's why there's no forced entry, And so I believe this was likely somebody my dad knew. But the only reason why I can't say that 100% degree of certainty, it's like you said, the crackhead behavior. It's like, well, there's still these really weird things that happen that are either staged or just don't fit with the type of people my dad knew.
When people are passionate about things, like the person that did this to your father, that doesn't mean that whatever they were impassioned about actually had any meaning for your father. But they felt that way. And if this happened out of their own sense of whatever, craziness in the moment, and then to stage the scene afterwards, like, I don't know. That whole theory kind of tracks with me. That he possibly could have quasi-known this person. And I say quasi only because it doesn't seem like they knew him very well, that they would stage the scene that way or not take off or abscond with other things. I don't know. Yeah, I totally do resonate with your whole confusion in it all. And it is a lot of unanswered questions. And I'm sorry for that for you. I really am.
Mike, what question do you wish people would ask you about your father, but they never do? Is there anything that you would like to tell our listeners about your dad?
Great question. So I guess and we've touched on this a little bit, but whenever a murder happens, it robs the victim of time on this earth, and it robs their loved ones from time with the victim. The biggest thing that I think about when I think about my dad's case is the time that was taken away from my children from getting to know somebody who was a fantastic grandfather. My father loved children. He always wanted me to have a whole bunch of children. And, I started having a whole bunch of children, and then, he never got to he got to hold my second one. He got to spend lots of time with my first one, but he never got to meet his grandson, named after him. And that, to me, is really just the toughest thing. Because, like so many people, when they get to retirement age, they live for their grandchildren, and that's what they look forward to. And And, like, that's just such an awful way to go out. And so I think of what could have been. It's very easy to, focus on his life and all these things, but there's also the what could have been. And so it's just something to think about when people are, processing how these cases affect families. You just think about what could have been.
Agreed.
Yeah. I just want to say, I undoubtedly think that your father would be super proud of you in everything that you're doing, both professionally, personally, parenting, all of that. But what do you think he'd say about all of the work that you've been doing and what you're doing now? What do you think your father would say?
Great question. I mean, he would be upset that I'm no longer in public office. He would be encouraging me to run for office again. He would be very thrilled about, his grandchildren. And I'm sure he'd have some strong opinions about how I was raising them, in my parenting techniques, because Lord knows there's lots of different opinions on things like that. He probably already thought that I was too strict, but when he was raising me, he was strict too, and so was my mother.
Yeah, right.
So, I don't know, but I like to think that we've honored his legacy and that we're doing things to keep his memory alive with the next generations.
Agreed, and good job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do, there's just one thing I wanted to say. I know, and you just mentioned it, that your youngest child, your son, named after your father, does things that your father used to do, which I think is so amazing. There's something about a tomato every morning.
Yeah. So my father was, people in the book sort of get to know him. I mean, when he died, he was an old Italian man, and he was very, very much an Italian, right? And he loved fruit and, growing stuff, and we talked about that. My dad would get up in the morning and eat a tomato, like an apple, like he just would. And he liked to do that. So, we have this son, and he doesn't look like my dad. He's got this giant head of like curly blonde hair. He looks like a California surfer kid. But this kid gets up in the morning and eats a tomato. I mean, it's like so bizarre. And he's obsessed with fruit. And I gotta say, like, consciously or subconsciously, I did not instill that into him. That's who he is. He goes around the neighborhood and like picks fruit from trees, and he expresses an interest in growing fruit trees and stuff like this, and plays football and baseball and all these things. And it's just amazing how this kid is a quarter of my dad, but there's certain traits that are just all my father, and I love that about him. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. To me, it seems like your dad is living through your son for you, and I find that so beautiful.
There's a thread of his spirit that will live with you, and now you get to raise, and that piece of his spirit will be with you forever, and I love that.
Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mike, for letting me tell the story of your father.
Thank you for telling it. I really appreciate all the work you do, and you have a huge, huge fan in me.
Thank you. It's definitely an honor.
It's definitely reciprocated now, the fandom.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're locked in. You're locked in. So I hope to God, I hope and pray that someone says something. All we need is one person. So please keep in touch with us if something moves in the right direction. I would love to hear it.
Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much.